When my boss looked me dead in the eye and told me I was not qualified for the promotion I had essentially created, I did not argue. I smiled, got in my car, and drove home in silence. 3 days later, I turned my phone back on to 90 missed calls and a company in absolute freefall. My name is Clara. I am 33 years old, and for years I played the role of the dutiful daughter and the relentless corporate workhorse. If you have ever sacrificed your own success just to keep the peace in a toxic family, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe because you will definitely want to hear how the people who tried to bury me ended up digging their own graves. Which is exactly why we feel this transition is the best move for the company. Vice President Donovan finished his sentence, his voice echoing in the glass-enclosed boardroom of Apex Tech Solutions. The 55-year-old executive carelessly tossed my flawless annual performance review aside, letting the thick stack of papers slide across the polished mahogany table. I sat completely still, my hands folded in my lap, processing the words that had just left his mouth. "You're incredibly hardworking, Clara." Donovan continued, adjusting his expensive tie. "But for the senior director position, we need someone with real leadership vision, someone who naturally commands a room. Therefore, the promotion is going to Jamal." I slowly turned my head to look at the man sitting across from me. Jamal, my 32-year-old brother-in-law, leaned back in his leather ergonomic chair. As an African-American man with $1 million smile and a silver tongue, Jamal had always possessed an unearned arrogance that charmed exactly the wrong kind of people. He was a master at taking credit for other people's hard work, specifically my hard work. Over the past 2 years, I had covered his mistakes, fixed his broken reports, and quietly handled his client complaints just to keep the peace at family dinners. Right now, that arrogance was on full display. He smirked at me, his eyes dancing with triumph. Click, click. The sound broke the heavy silence in the room. He was repeatedly clicking a black and silver pen. Not just any pen. It was a $500 Mont Blanc pen. The exact same pen I had purchased for him as a congratulatory gift 2 years ago, when I personally pulled strings to get him hired at this very company. He had been unemployed for 6 months, and I had risked my own professional reputation to vouch for him. Now he was sitting across from me, stealing the promotion I had worked 70-hour weeks to secure. "Don't take it too hard, Clara," Jamal said, his tone dripping with fake sympathy. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, trying to look like the authoritative leader he clearly believed he was. "You're still an essential part of the operational structure. I'm really going to need you to stay on my team to handle all those boring spreadsheets. You're so good at the tedious stuff." I did not cry. I did not raise my voice or throw a tantrum. Instead, a cold, crystalline clarity washed over me. The puzzle pieces were rapidly snapping together in my mind. This was not just a corporate betrayal. This was a family conspiracy. The echo of a phone call from the previous night suddenly rang loud and clear in my memory. My mother Martha had called me right as I was reviewing my final presentation for this role. Her tone had been urgent, demanding, and utterly devoid of any consideration for my feelings. "Clara," my mother had said through the phone, "you need to step aside on this promotion. Jamal needs this more than you do. Olivia is 29 and pregnant with her first child. They want to buy that new 5-bedroom house in the suburbs, and Jamal needs a higher salary to qualify for the mortgage. You're single. You don't have a family to support. It's your duty to help your sister. Family takes care of family." She had commanded me to sabotage my own career so her golden child daughter could have a perfect suburban life funded by a husband who could not even write a basic data query. I had refused her demand last night, but clearly my mother had found another way. She must have pressured Jamal to go behind my back to schmooze Donovan on the golf course to steal the role I had basically invented. They expected me to argue. They expected me to beg, or maybe offer to train Jamal, while he took the credit and the massive salary bump. Donovan looked at me, expecting compliance. Jamal kept clicking that expensive pen, waiting for me to nod and accept my place in the shadows. Instead, I stood up. The movement was slow and deliberate. I reached up and unclipped my employee badge from my blazer. The plastic ID card felt light in my hand. I tossed it onto the mahogany table. It landed right on top of my discarded performance review with a sharp smack. I looked directly into Jamal's eyes, watching his smug smile falter just a fraction. Then I looked at Donovan, whose face suddenly registered a flicker of confusion. They believed employees would always accept mistreatment for a paycheck. My family had conditioned them to believe I would always surrender my own happiness to ensure theirs. They were both completely and entirely wrong. Good luck with the spreadsheets, I said, my voice completely steady and chillingly calm. I did not wait to hear their empty excuses or backpedaling. I turned around, pushed the heavy glass door open, and walked away from that miserable room forever. I'm out. The heavy glass door clicked shut behind me, sealing their stunned silence inside the boardroom. My heels struck the polished concrete floor, setting a sharp and rapid rhythm. I did not run. I walked with the absolute precision of someone walking away from a fire. Wait! Jamal's voice hissed behind me. His leather shoes slapped loudly against the floor. I ignored him. I reached my desk at the center of the bullpen. The entire floor was a sea of gray cubicles and buzzing monitors. I grabbed a small cardboard box, a few framed photos, a favorite coffee mug, my ergonomic mouse. I started dropping them into the box. Clara, stop this right now, Jamal whispered. His eyes darted around the room nervously. You're making a huge scene. You're embarrassing the family. Are you listening to me? Jamal grabbed the edge of my desk. Mom is going to flip out if you do this. Olivia needs that house. You can't just throw a tantrum and quit because you didn't get your way. Stop packing and get back in that boardroom before Donovan decides to actually accept your resignation. I did not offer him a single syllable in response. He was losing control of the narrative. What is going on? Donovan boomed. The entire office froze. Donovan stormed out of the glass boardroom. His face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson. He marched down the center aisle. You listen to me very carefully, Clara, Donovan shouted, pointing a thick finger directly at my face. You do not just walk out of my office. You do not throw your badge on my table. If you walk out that door today, I will personally make sure you never work in corporate logistics again. I know every major player in this industry. I will make one phone call and your career is permanently over. You will be blacklisted from here to the coast. A heavy, suffocating silence blanketed the room. My coworkers stared at me with wide eyes, waiting for me to apologize, waiting for me to crumble under the weight of a powerful executive destroying my professional future. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. Instead, I reached for the one item on my desk that truly mattered, my personal laptop. I opened the sleek silver device and flipped the screen up. What are you doing? Jamal demanded, his voice trembling slightly. He tried to look at my screen, but I angled it away from him. I was executing a sequence I had prepared for months, just in case this exact scenario ever played out. Apex Tech Solutions handled billions of dollars in freight and shipping logistics, but their legacy software was a broken, tangled mess. For the past 3 years, the entire company had been running smoothly because of a proprietary back-end routing system. It was an advanced algorithm that automated the most complex supply chain issues, cutting delivery times in half and saving the company millions in operational costs. Donovan thought the corporate technology department built it. Jamal told everyone he managed it. The truth was entirely different. I built it. I coded it from scratch late at night on my own personal equipment on my own time. I owned the source code. I owned the intellectual property outright through a private business entity. I had merely granted Apex Tech a free revocable license to use it because it made my job easier and kept clients happy. My fingers danced across the keyboard. 10 keystrokes. That was all it took. I navigated to the administrative dashboard of the routing system. I clicked the master control panel. I initiated the revocation protocol. I deactivated the access keys connecting my private server to the Apex Tech corporate network. I watched the progress bar hit 100%. A small green check mark appeared on my screen confirming the total disconnection. I closed the laptop with a satisfying snap and placed it carefully into my cardboard box. I placed my charger on top of the closed laptop. I arranged my items so nothing would spill or break during my drive home. I took one final look at the desk, where I had sacrificed my time, energy, and mental health for ungrateful management and a brother-in-law who stole my achievements. The surface was now bare, reflecting the harsh overhead lighting. "You are making the biggest mistake of your entire life," Donovan sneered, crossing his arms over his chest, completely unaware of the digital bomb I had just detonated. His face was twisted in anger, furious that his public display of power was not getting the submissive reaction he demanded. He thought I was throwing away a steady paycheck. He had no idea I was walking away with the keys to his entire operational kingdom. I picked up the box. It weighed almost nothing. I turned to face Jamal, who was standing frozen in my workspace. His arrogant posture had vanished, replaced by a rigid stiffness. I looked him dead in the eye and gave him a slow, chilling smile. It was a smile completely devoid of warmth, a predatory look that finally made him step back. He suddenly realized he had no idea how to actually do the job he just stole. Without my system, his promotion was totally worthless. I walked past Donovan without a single word. My heels clicked against the concrete floor, echoing loudly in the completely silent room. I kept my head high, my posture perfect. I walked straight to the elevator bank and pressed the down button. The button illuminated with a soft white glow. I watched the digital floor display numbers descend from the penthouse level. The entire office watched me. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the phones seemed to have stopped ringing. The soft chime of the elevator arriving sounded incredibly loud in the heavy quiet. The polished metal doors slid open. I stepped directly into the elevator. I turned to face the bullpen as the heavy metal doors glided shut, cutting off my view of Donovan's red face and Jamal's panicked stare. The descent took exactly 40 seconds. I did not shed a tear. I did not feel panic. Instead, icy relief washed over me. For years, I had carried the immense weight of my family's unreasonable expectations, breaking my back to keep the peace, while they eagerly handed my hard-earned achievements to my brother-in-law. That crushing weight was finally gone. I walked out of the Apex Tech building, stepped into the bright afternoon sunlight, and inhaled a breath of fresh air. I climbed into my car, tossed the cardboard box onto the passenger seat, and pulled out my smartphone. The screen was lighting up with incoming calls from human resources and text messages from my mother. Martha was undoubtedly demanding an explanation for why Jamal was frantically texting her about my sudden departure. I did not read a single message. I held the power button down, watched the screen go black, and tossed the device into the glove compartment. I drove home in silence, enjoying the smooth highway traffic. My apartment welcomed me with a quiet serenity I had deeply missed. I kicked off my heels, dropped my blazer on the armchair, and walked into the kitchen. I uncorked a bottle of red wine I had been saving. Today was a special occasion. I poured a glass, grabbed my laptop from my box, and sat down at my kitchen island. The setting sun cast long shadows across the room as I opened my encrypted file system. It was time to review the legal armor I had spent years building. I opened a folder labeled Nexus Freight Dynamics. This was my private registered corporate entity. I established it 3 years ago when I realized the sheer magnitude of the supply chain inefficiencies at Apex Tech. Back then, I approached Donovan with a proposal to build an automated routing system. He laughed in my face, telling me creating proprietary software was above my pay grade and unnecessary. So I built it anyway. I spent my weekends coding a highly advanced logistical framework that could predict shipping delays, reroute freight trucks in real time, and calculate optimal fuel expenditures. When I finished, I quietly integrated it into my daily workflow to manage my workload. Within 2 months, my department's productivity skyrocketed. Soon, the entire company was relying on the flawless data outputs my system generated. Jamal took credit for the seamless operational flow, claiming his leadership drove the profits. But they never owned the machine. They only enjoyed the results. I had drafted a meticulous software licensing agreement under Nexus Freight Dynamics. The contract granted Apex Tech a free revocable license to utilize the routing code because they never paid me for the software and I developed it exclusively on my personal hardware outside of company hours. My intellectual property rights were completely airtight. The fine print of the license stated that the creator retained the absolute right to terminate access at any moment without prior warning for any reason whatsoever. By pressing those 10 keystrokes in the bullpen, I had simply exercised my legal right as the sole proprietor of the software. I took a slow sip of my wine. Apex Tech handled hundreds of thousands of active shipping routes every single day. Without my algorithm constantly calculating and correcting the logistics grid, their corporate network was effectively a blind giant running toward a cliff. I closed the laptop, finished my wine, and decided I was going to enjoy a long weekend. For the next 72 hours, I lived in absolute peace. I did not look at a computer screen. I did not check my email. I went for long runs in the nearby park. I read a fiction book from cover to cover. I slept for 8 hours a night, waking up without the crushing anxiety of managing Jamal's incoming disasters or dealing with my mother's manipulative guilt trips. The world outside my apartment continued to spin, but my personal universe was calm. Monday morning arrived with bright sunshine pouring through my bedroom blinds. I stretched, made a cup of coffee, and decided the blackout period was officially over. It was time to see the damage. I retrieved my phone from the glove compartment of my car and plugged it into the charger in my kitchen. I pressed the power button and waited for the device to boot up. The moment the screen illuminated, the phone seized up. It began vibrating violently against the granite countertop, emitting a relentless barrage of notification chimes. The screen exploded with a chaotic flood of red alerts. I picked up the device and looked at the lock screen. 90 missed calls, 154 text messages. The notifications painted a picture of corporate devastation. There were 20 calls from Donovan alone. There were 30 calls from Jamal. The rest were from frantic executives, board members, and my hysterical parents. I scrolled through the text messages. Clara, the entire freight network is down. Call me immediately. This is Donovan. What did you do to the system? We are losing millions. Pick up the phone. Clara, please. The clients are pulling their contracts. You have to fix this. How could you do this to your family? Jamal is crying in his office. Apex Tech's nationwide network had collapsed. Trucks were stranded at distribution centers without routing orders. Major corporate clients were flying blind. The company was bleeding money by the minute, and the executives were in panic mode. My brother-in-law, the newly minted senior director of operations, had been exposed as a fraud who could not even turn the lights back on. I took a sip of my coffee, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. The snowball had officially started rolling down the mountain, and it was about to crush every person who had taken me for granted. Before I could even set my coffee mug down on the counter, a violent pounding echoed through my apartment. The knocking was not polite or hesitant. It was a frantic, aggressive hammering against the wood, loud enough to rattle the picture frames hanging in my hallway. I glanced at the digital clock on my microwave. It was barely 8:00 in the morning. Nobody visits unannounced at this hour, unless they are selling something or desperate. Judging by the digital carnage on my phone screen, I knew exactly which category my visitors fell into. I walked to the front door, my bare feet silent against the hardwood floor. I did not bother looking through the peephole. I reached out, turned the deadbolt, and pulled the door open. My entire toxic family stood in the hallway, looking like a mob preparing to storm a castle. My sister Olivia stood near the back, heavily pregnant and clutching her designer handbag with white knuckles. My mother Martha and my father Richard flanked the doorway, their faces drawn tight with anger and exhaustion. But the person leading the charge was Jamal. Before I could even offer a greeting, Jamal shoved past me. He did not ask for permission to enter my home. He simply barged into my sanctuary, bringing the frantic energy of a collapsing corporate empire right into my living room. My parents and Olivia filed in right behind him, forming a wall of hostility in my entryway. Jamal was completely unrecognizable from the smug, tailored executive who had smirked at me in the glass boardroom just 3 days ago. His expensive suit jacket was wrinkled and stained with spilled coffee. His tie hung loosely around his neck, the knot pulled down in sheer panic. His eyes were bloodshot from a severe lack of sleep, and beads of sweat glistened on his forehead. He was not acting like a senior director of operations. He was acting like a man who was watching his entire life burn to the ground. "Fix it!" Jamal screamed, his voice cracking as he paced across my living room rug. "You need to fix it right now, Clara. Turn the system back on. Give me the administrative passwords." I closed the front door calmly, leaning back against the solid wood. I crossed my arms over my chest and watched him panic. "Fix what, Jamal?" I asked, keeping my voice completely level. "I no longer work at Apex Tech Solutions. Your operational problems are exactly that. Your problems." "Don't play games with me," Jamal yelled, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "The entire freight network is completely dead. We have thousands of trucks sitting idle at distribution centers across the country. Drivers can't get their routing assignments. Warehouses can't process their incoming inventory. The automated dispatch software is demanding an encryption key that nobody in the entire technology department possesses. You changed the master passwords and locked us out." I watched his chest heave as he struggled to catch his breath. The sheer terror in his eyes was almost beautiful to witness. He had spent years riding on my coattails, pretending my hard work was his own brilliant strategy. Now faced with an actual technological crisis, the newly minted senior director was completely helpless. "The Vanguard logistics accounts are failing," Jamal continued, his voice rising in pitch. "Vanguard is our biggest client. They move millions of dollars in freight every single day. Their regional managers have been calling my personal cell phone since Friday night, demanding to know why their entire supply chain is paralyzed. If we don't restore the routing system by noon today, Vanguard is going to pull their contract. If they pull their contract, Apex Tech goes bankrupt. Do you understand what you have done? Hand over the administrative passwords right now." He lunged forward, stopping just inches from where I stood. He tried to use his physical presence to intimidate me, a tactic he often used during family arguments to force compliance. But I did not shrink away. I did not lower my gaze. I stood my ground, staring directly into his bloodshot eyes. "I don't owe you anything, Jamal," I said softly. "You wanted the leadership role. You wanted the title and the salary in the corner office. Well, congratulations. You got exactly what you wanted. Real leaders figure out how to solve catastrophic network failures. I suggest you head back to the office and start typing." Jamal let out a sound of pure frustration. "You're sabotaging my career out of jealousy." He spat the words at me, his face twisting with rage. "That's what this is all about. You're bitter because Donovan finally recognized my talent. You're throwing a massive destructive tantrum because you couldn't handle losing the promotion to a better candidate. You locked the system just to make me look bad in front of the executive board. You're trying to ruin my life because you're jealous." The accusation was so wildly disconnected from reality that I almost laughed. Jamal actually believed his own fabricated narrative. He truly believed he possessed talent, completely ignoring the fact that he was currently standing in my living room begging me to save a company he claimed to lead. His arrogance was breathtaking, but his desperation was palpable. He needed me to cave. I expected me to bow my head, apologize for causing a scene, and hand over the keys to my proprietary software just to restore the family peace. My mother stepped forward, placing herself between Jamal and me. She positioned herself as the ultimate family peacemaker, though her version of peacemaking always involved me, sacrificing my dignity to appease my sister's husband. Martha looked at me with an expression of profound disappointment, the exact same look she used when I was a teenager to make me feel small and insignificant. She reached out and touched my arm, her fingers gripping my sleeve tightly. "Clara, please stop being so difficult." Martha continued, her voice dropping into that familiar, sickeningly sweet tone she always used when she was trying to manipulate me into submission. "You know your brother-in-law didn't mean any of those harsh things he just said. He's just under a tremendous amount of stress right now. Your family, Clara. You have to fix this system for him." I pulled my arm out of her grasp. I took a step back, breaking the physical connection she was trying to use to anchor her guilt trip. Richard stepped forward to fill the gap. He puffed out his chest, attempting to project the stern patriarchal authority he thought he still held over me. "Listen to your mother," Richard demanded, his voice thick with condescension. "You are acting completely out of line. We didn't raise you to be this vindictive. Jamal is simply trying to do his job and provide for your sister. You should be helping him succeed, not throwing obstacles in his path just because your ego took a tiny bruise at work. Give him the passwords. Apologize for this ridiculous stunt, and we can all move past this immediately." "A tiny bruise," I repeated, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I built the entire logistical framework that is currently keeping this company afloat. I handed him every report, every strategy, every single presentation that earned him that promotion. And you call my reaction a tiny bruise to my ego, you call my refusal to be a doormat, vindictive." Martha threw her hands in the air, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated outrage. "How can you be so selfish?" she screamed, completely abandoning her sweet peacemaker persona. The veins in her neck strained as she pointed sharply at Jamal and Olivia. "Jamal is the provider of this family. Olivia is pregnant. They are building a life, a real future, and you are trying to tear it all down because you're miserable and alone. It's just like when you refused to co-sign her car loan. You have always been obsessed with watching your sister fail." The air in the living room suddenly felt charged with electricity. The mention of that car loan was the exact weapon she had used against me for years, but this time it was a profound mistake on her part. I felt a cold, hard smile pull at the corners of my mouth. I stepped directly toward my mother, forcing her to look me in the eye. "You mean the car loan you wanted me to pay for using my community college tuition money?" I asked, my voice slicing through the room like a freshly sharpened blade. My mother flinched, but I did not stop. "You wanted me to empty the bank account I built by working back-to-back night shifts at a diner. You demanded I hand over every cent of my education fund so Olivia could buy a brand new luxury vehicle she couldn't afford. The tuition I paid for by working those night shifts, while you and Dad bought Olivia a Mercedes in cash for her high school graduation. That car loan." Richard stepped in front of Martha, his face reddening. "Do not speak to your mother that way," he barked. "We provided a roof over your head. We gave you everything you needed to succeed." "You gave Olivia everything she wanted," I corrected him swiftly, maintaining my absolute composure. "You gave me a roof and an endless list of demands. You expected me to finance her lifestyle while I wore secondhand clothes and studied on the floor of a basement apartment. You built a pedestal for her and expected me to gladly lie down and be the stairs she stepped on to reach it. That dynamic is completely over. I will not finance Jamal's unearned corporate success the same way I refuse to finance Olivia's cars." Right on cue, Olivia let out a sharp, dramatic gasp. She stumbled backward, bumping into the wall, and immediately clutched her rounded stomach with both hands. Tears instantly flooded her eyes, spilling over her carefully applied makeup. "Oh my God!" Olivia wailed, her voice trembling with practiced fragility. "The stress is too much for the baby, Jamal. It hurts. My stomach hurts so badly. Clara is doing this on purpose. She wants me to lose the house. She wants me to lose everything." Jamal rushed to her side, wrapping his arms protectively around her shoulders. He glared at me with absolute disgust, completely ignoring the fact that his own spectacular incompetence was the root cause of this entire situation. "Look at what you're doing to your pregnant sister," Jamal shouted, his voice echoing loudly off my apartment walls. "You're a monster, Clara. A cold, bitter monster." "Oh!" Martha rushed to Olivia's other side, rubbing her back and making soothing noises. "We need to get her out of here," Martha said frantically. "The negative energy in this room is toxic. Clara, I hope you're happy with yourself. You're destroying this family." I stood my ground in the center of my living room, watching their theatrical performance unfold. It was the exact same script they had followed my entire life. Make an unreasonable demand, accuse me of selfishness when I refuse, and then have Olivia play the fragile victim to force my compliance through overwhelming guilt. For 33 years, it had worked flawlessly. Every single time she cried, every single time they called me selfish, I would eventually cave. I would write the check, do the homework, fix the spreadsheet, step aside, and apologize for existing. But not today. Today the script was being rewritten, and I was the one holding the pen. The guilt trip that used to paralyze me now felt completely powerless, entirely transparent, and deeply pathetic. I looked at Olivia, who was peering at me from behind her hands, waiting for me to break. I turned my back on her performance and walked directly into my kitchen. I picked up my coffee mug from the granite counter. The ceramic was still pleasantly warm against my palms. I brought the rim to my lips and took a long, slow sip. The rich, dark roast grounded me. The frantic yelling, the manufactured tears, and the aggressive posturing happening in my living room felt like a poorly written television show playing at a low volume. I was completely unfazed. The chaotic energy they brought into my home bounced off my absolute calm. I walked back out from the kitchen and stood leaning against the island, holding my mug with both hands. I watched my mother stroke Olivia's hair while my father continued to glare at me with righteous indignation. Jamal was still holding my sister, murmuring comforting words while shooting me venomous looks over her shoulder. They were all waiting for my capitulation. They expected me to panic at the sight of Olivia in distress. "Are you quite finished?" I asked. My voice did not echo or shout. It cut through their noise with the precision of a scalpel. My father opened his mouth to launch into another tirade about family loyalty, but I held up a single authoritative finger. The gesture was so sharp and unexpected that it actually silenced him. "Since we're all gathered here today to discuss Jamal's thriving career, let's talk about his actual qualifications," I said, maintaining my relaxed posture against the kitchen island. "Let's talk about the newly appointed Senior Director of Operations." I looked directly at my parents, who were suddenly looking very confused. Over the past 2 years, Jamal has not produced a single original piece of data analysis. Every quarterly report he presented to the executive board was generated using my custom Excel templates. Every single one. If you ask him to build a pivot table right now, he will break out in a cold sweat. If you ask him to explain the supply chain bottlenecks in the Midwest corridor, he will recite the exact summary paragraph I typed for him on Tuesday. Jamal stepped away from Olivia, his face turning an alarming shade of gray. "Clara, shut your mouth," he demanded, his voice cracking with panic. He lunged forward slightly, but my father put a hand on his arm to stop him. Richard was looking at Jamal, then back at me, a flicker of doubt finally piercing his patriarchal arrogance. "He can't manage logistics." I continued, my voice steady and unrelenting. "He doesn't know how to code. He doesn't understand the back-end routing architecture. He spent his days scheduling catered lunches and playing golf with Donovan while I managed the entire freight network from my cubicle. The only reason the Vanguard Logistics account stayed with Apex Tech is because I personally monitored their shipping routes every weekend. Jamal got the promotion because he is excellent at taking credit for my late nights. He is a phenomenal actor, just like Olivia. But acting doesn't fix catastrophic network failures. Acting doesn't reboot a paralyzed supply chain." "You're lying," Martha gasped, clutching her pearls in a gesture so dramatic it belonged on a stage. "Jamal is a brilliant executive. Donovan said so himself at the holiday party. You're just saying these horrible things to ruin his reputation because you're a spiteful person." I set my coffee mug down on the counter with a heavy thud. "I'm not lying, Martha. I am explaining exactly why the company is currently bleeding millions of dollars. The system that runs Apex Tech does not belong to Apex Tech. It belongs to me." The living room went dead silent. The sound of city traffic humming outside my apartment window suddenly seemed incredibly loud. Richard frowned, his thick eyebrows knitting together in deep confusion. "What are you talking about?" Richard asked, his voice losing its aggressive edge. "You work for them. They own whatever you do at work. That's how employment works. Clara, stop making up ridiculous stories to justify your behavior." I shook my head slowly, pitying his ignorance. "I built the automated routing system on my own time. I wrote the source code on my personal laptop sitting right here at this kitchen island on my weekends and evenings. Apex Tech never compensated me for development. I never signed an intellectual property transfer. 3 years ago, I legally registered a limited liability company. I filed the copyright and the patents under my private business entity. The software that Jamal claims to manage belongs entirely to my independent LLC. The word LLC dropped into the room like a heavy stone. My parents stared at me completely stunned. The concept that their quiet, obedient pushover daughter had established a legal corporate entity and secured intellectual property rights behind their backs was entirely incomprehensible to them. They had spent their entire lives underestimating my intelligence, viewing me merely as a support system for Olivia and her husband. The realization that I was a business owner, a legal entity holding the keys to a corporate empire, short-circuited their entire worldview. Martha opened her mouth, but no words came out. Richard looked at Jamal, whose pale, terrified face confirmed every single word I had just spoken. Jamal knew I was telling the truth. He knew he had built his entire career on a foundation of sand, and I had just washed the sand away. I granted Apex Tech a free license to use my software, I explained, driving the final nail into the coffin. Because they never paid my LLC a single dime for the technology, that license was entirely revocable at my discretion. When Donovan insulted me and gave my job to a man who can't even run a basic data query, I simply revoked the license. I logged out. I took my private property, and I went home. I didn't sabotage anything. I simply took back what rightfully belonged to me. Jamal stared at me, searching for an argument that did not exist. The crushing reality had finally penetrated his thick skull. He could not charm his way out of a missing source code. His operations were dead. Humiliation flooded his face, rapidly morphing into vicious rage. He lunged a step closer, his fists balled. "You think you're so smart?" Jamal spat, his voice trembling with terror and malice. "You think you can shut down a logistics network and walk away? Donovan has already contacted the police. He has the corporate legal team drafting the lawsuit right this second. They're tracking your digital footprint. You are going to prison for corporate sabotage, Clara. You're going to be locked in a federal cell, and I'm going to testify against you. They're going to ruin you financially." Jamal continued, pointing his finger at my face. "They will drain your bank accounts. You will be paying restitution to Apex Tech Solutions for the rest of your miserable life. Give me the access keys right now, and I might convince Donovan not to press criminal charges." His threats were hollow. Jamal did not understand intellectual property law. Donovan was just a corporate bully. I felt profound pity looking at Jamal. He was a cornered animal barking at a concrete wall. Before I could dissect his empty legal threats, my father intervened. Richard stepped around my mother, his face a mask of grim determination. He completely ignored the fact that his son-in-law had just threatened me with federal prison. Richard only cared about preserving the illusion of his perfect family. "Clara, listen to me," Richard demanded, his voice dropping into a dangerous register. "I don't care about your little software company. I don't care who wrote the code or who deserves the credit. This has gone far enough. Go into your bedroom, bring out your laptop, and hand it over to Jamal. You will do it right now for the good of the family name. We will not have our reputation dragged through the mud because of your selfish behavior." He was entirely willing to force me to surrender a multi-million-dollar asset just to save face at the country club. He wanted me to hand over my private property to a man who had actively stolen my career progression. "I am not handing over my laptop," I stated, my tone dangerously calm. "You will do as you are told," Richard roared, taking a heavy step toward me. He reached his hand out, fully expecting me to flinch and obey the patriarchal command he had utilized to control me for 33 years. "Hand over the machine right now, or you will regret it." I did not flinch. I did not argue the legalities of corporate sabotage with men who refused to understand the law. I simply reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I kept my eyes locked on my father as I unlocked the screen. The family watched me, a sudden wave of uncertainty rippling through their aggressive formation. They expected tears. They expected an argument. They did not expect absolute icy detachment. I tapped the phone app. I deliberately pressed the number 9, then the number 1, then the number 1 again. I held the illuminated screen up so my father, my mother, Olivia, and Jamal could clearly see the 3 digits typed on the display. I hovered my thumb directly over the green call button. "You have exactly 30 seconds to get out of my home before I report a break-in." I said, my voice cutting through the tension like breaking glass. I will tell the dispatcher that 4 hostile individuals have forced their way into my apartment, that they are threatening me, and that I fear for my physical safety. The police station is 3 blocks away. They will be here in less than 5 minutes. Martha gasped, grabbing Richard's arm. Clara, you wouldn't dare call the police on your own parents. Try me, I replied, my thumb hovering less than an inch from the button. 20 seconds. The shift in the room was instantaneous. The arrogant entitlement completely vanished, replaced by sheer panic. My parents had spent their entire lives cultivating a spotless public image. The mere thought of being escorted out of a residential building in handcuffs by uniformed police officers was a nightmare they could not stomach. Let's go, Richard snapped, grabbing Martha by the elbow and shoving her toward the front door. She's completely unhinged. She's lost her mind. Olivia let out another dramatic wail, clinging to Jamal's arm as they scrambled toward the exit. You are a terrible sister, Olivia cried, her face twisted in genuine fury now that her victim routine had completely failed. I hope you rot in that apartment. I hope Donovan destroys you. Jamal glared at me with pure venom as he backed out of the doorway. This is not over, Clara, he threatened, his voice shaking. You are going to pay for this. You are going to lose everything. 10 seconds. I counted aloud, never taking my eyes off them. They stumbled out into the hallway, a chaotic mess of cursing, crying, and panicked retreats. Richard slammed my front door shut behind them so hard the walls vibrated. I stood in my living room listening to their frantic footsteps echoing down the corridor, followed by the distant ding of the elevator arriving. I lowered my phone and deleted the numbers from the screen. The apartment was finally silent again. The invasion was over. My family had shown me exactly who they were, and I had shown them exactly what I was capable of. I walked over to the front door, engaged the deadbolt, and fastened the security chain. I smiled, feeling a profound sense of victory. I was ready for war. I was absolutely ready for war. The very next morning, I stepped out of a cab in front of the Capitol Grill, an exclusively upscale steakhouse in downtown Chicago. This was the kind of restaurant where multi-million-dollar acquisitions were negotiated over dry-aged ribeyes and perfectly chilled martinis. I walked through the heavy mahogany doors, bypassing the crowded bar area, and let the hostess guide me to a secluded leather booth tucked away in the back corner. Waiting for me was attorney Harrison. Harrison was a 60-year-old legal shark who specialized entirely in intellectual property and corporate litigation. He wore a custom-tailored navy suit and projected an aura of absolute unshakable confidence. We had been quietly working together for 3 years, ever since I first realized the massive value of the code I was writing for Apex Tech Solutions. I slid into the booth across from him and immediately pulled a thick, crumpled envelope from my designer tote bag. Good morning, Clara, Harrison said, taking a slow sip of his sparkling water. You look remarkably rested for a woman whose former employer is currently making national headlines for a catastrophic operational failure. I smiled and placed the envelope directly on the white linen tablecloth. I slept a solid 8 hours, I replied, sliding the paper toward him. But it seems Donovan and his legal team stayed up all night. A courier delivered this to my apartment building at 6 in the morning. Harrison picked up the envelope, pulled out the thick stack of legal documents, and adjusted his reading glasses. It was a formal cease and desist order from Apex Tech Solutions. The letter was packed with aggressive corporate jargon. It demanded the immediate surrender of all administrative passwords, threatened a massive civil lawsuit for breach of contract, and accused me of corporate espionage. I watched Harrison read through the aggressive demands. I expected him to frown, or perhaps take out a pen to highlight the legal threats. Instead, Harrison threw his head back and laughed. It was a rich, booming laugh that caused a nearby waiter to glance over in our direction. Harrison tossed the document back onto the table like it was a piece of trash. This is absolutely pathetic, Harrison said, chuckling as he took off his glasses. This entire document is nothing but corporate posturing and hot air. Donovan is terrified and his legal team is grasping at straws. They have absolutely zero legal ground to stand on and they know it. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. Are you absolutely certain the intellectual property filings are watertight? I asked, needing the verbal confirmation to calm the residual adrenaline from yesterday's home invasion. Clara, your paperwork is ironclad, Harrison assured me, his tone shifting to absolute professional certainty. When we registered Nexus Freight Dynamics 3 years ago, we filed comprehensive patents and secured federal copyrights for every single line of source code you generated. We documented the timestamps proving you built the architecture on your personal servers using your own hardware strictly outside of your contracted working hours at Apex Tech. You never signed a non-compete agreement that claimed secondary developments, and you never signed an IP transfer clause. You own the software outright. Apex Tech was operating strictly on a free, revocable end-user license agreement. When you revoked that license, you were simply closing the door to your own private property. I let out a slow breath. Donovan threatened to have me arrested for corporate sabotage, I said, recalling the red-faced vice president screaming in the bullpen. He told my brother-in-law I was going to federal prison. Harrison waved his hand dismissively. Donovan is a corporate bully who is used to terrifying entry-level employees with empty threats. Corporate sabotage implies you destroyed their proprietary property. You didn't destroy anything. You simply stopped giving them your property for free. There is no judge in this country who would indict you for locking the front door of your own house. The waiter arrived, dropping off 2 cups of black coffee before discreetly walking away. Harrison leaned in closer, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. The real issue here is not what you did to them, Clara. The real issue is what they are currently trying to do to you. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a manila folder, setting it squarely between us. I have been monitoring the server logs on the Nexus Freight Dynamics backend since you initiated the lockout protocol, Harrison explained. Apex Tech is bleeding millions of dollars a day. Their board of directors is panicking. Vanguard Logistics is threatening to pull their account. In their sheer desperation to turn the lights back on Donovan and your brother-in-law, have authorized their IT department to force their way into your software. I stared at him, my heart skipping a beat. Are they trying to hack the system? They are actively trying to bypass your encryption, Harrison confirmed, tapping a printed spreadsheet showing thousands of failed login attempts originating from Apex Tech IP addresses. They are running brute force attacks to crack your administrative passwords. They think if they can just break in and copy the source code, they can regain control of the freight network and claim you gave them access. I felt a cold smile stretch across my face. My toxic family and my arrogant boss were so blinded by their own entitlement that they were walking straight into a massive legal trap. They don't realize what they are actually doing, I said quietly. Exactly. Harrison grinned, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of a legal kill. By actively attempting to breach your private servers, Apex Tech is no longer just violating a software license. They are currently committing a felony under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. They are actively engaging in federal copyright infringement. You didn't break the law. They did. Harrison paused, letting the magnitude of that reality sink in. He leaned back against the plush leather booth, the victorious energy evaporating into a heavy, suffocating seriousness. He reached into his briefcase again, withdrawing a thick black folder sealed with a tamper-evident security tag. He placed it onto the tablecloth with care, treating it like a loaded weapon. We have a much larger problem, Harrison said. While monitoring the brute force attacks yesterday, I ran a forensic diagnostic on the server logs you secured before leaving Apex Tech. I wanted to ensure we had a perfect, untampered snapshot of the entire operational history, just in case Donovan tried to fabricate data against you. I stared at the black folder. My mouth went dry. A chill crawled up my spine, unrelated to the restaurant air conditioning. What did you find? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Harrison broke the security seal and opened the folder. He slid a stack of dense, highlighted financial routing logs across the table. I looked down at the numbers. At first glance, it looked like standard freight billing data, but as my eyes adjusted to the columns, I realized I was looking at something entirely different. These were shadow transactions. They were buried deep within the automated billing cycle for Vanguard Logistics, our largest and most lucrative client. Your brother-in-law was not just taking credit for your late nights and brilliant spreadsheets. Harrison explained, pointing his expensive pen at a specific cluster of highlighted numbers. Jamal has been extremely busy over the past 6 months. He has been quietly embedding ghost invoices into the Vanguard Logistics supply chain. Every time your software successfully routed a massive shipment and generated an invoice, Jamal manually intercepted the billing process on the back end. He shaved microscopic fractions of pennies off individual transit costs and redirected those hidden margins. I felt the blood drain from my face. I grabbed the papers and pulled them closer. The numbers danced before my eyes. Jamal was embezzling. The golden boy of the family, the man who demanded respect and obedience, was a common thief. But he was not stealing small amounts. The massive volume of freight Vanguard Logistics moved daily meant those microscopic fractions added up to an astronomical figure. He has been siphoning the money into a holding account hidden within the Apex Tech corporate structure. Harrison continued, his tone clinical and precise. Over the last 6 months, he has accumulated exactly $1.2 million. It is currently sitting in a digital vault waiting to be transferred out of the company. My hands started to shake. $1.2 million. If Vanguard Logistics discovered this massive theft, they would not just pull their contract, they would destroy Apex Tech. They would launch a federal investigation. Everyone involved in the account management would be subjected to criminal scrutiny. That included me. Where is the money going? I demanded, my mind racing through the catastrophic implications. That's the terrifying part, Harrison said. I tracked the destination code attached to the holding vault. It is a one-way routing sequence programmed to dump the entire $1.2 million into an untraceable offshore account based in the Cayman Islands. But he couldn't execute the final transfer. Why not? I asked, staring at the damning evidence. Because he lacked the executive security clearance, Harrison replied. And that brings us to the real reason you were denied your promotion on Monday morning. The realization hit me with the force of a speeding freight train. The glass boardroom. Donovan tossing my perfect performance review aside. Jamal smirking as he clicked his Mont Blanc pen. My mother calling me the night before, aggressively demanding that I step aside for the good of the family. The puzzle pieces shifted, forming a new, incredibly sinister picture. Jamal did not need the senior director position for the prestige. He did not need it for the corner office or the salary bump to buy Olivia her suburban dream house. I needed the promotion because the senior director title came with a level 5 executive security clearance. He needed that specific administrative access to bypass the final financial firewall and wire the embezzled $1.2 million to his offshore account. But that was not even the darkest part of his plan. Harrison leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. He knew the missing funds would eventually be flagged during the annual corporate audit. He needed a scapegoat. He needed a catastrophic failure to hide his tracks. And he needed a target to take the blame. I stared at the paperwork in absolute horror. He was going to frame me. Harrison nodded slowly. Once he secured the promotion and transferred the money, he planned to initiate a system crash within your proprietary routing software. He was going to use his new administrative clearance to inject malicious code into the Vanguard Logistics billing grid. I was going to manufacture a massive financial glitch and point the finger directly at the original developer, you. My breath caught in my throat. My family had conspired to hand my career to a man actively planning to send me to prison. My mother had unknowingly, or perhaps knowingly, pushed me toward the edge of a cliff to protect a criminal. Jamal had sat in my living room yesterday holding my pregnant sister, acting like a victim while actively working to destroy my entire existence. You were supposed to be the sacrificial lamb, Harrison stated very softly. When the auditors found the missing money, Jamal would have testified that your software failed. You would have faced federal charges completely alone. The sheer magnitude of his evil plan finally crystallized in my mind. My unexpected departure had accidentally trapped him. By logging out, I froze his money and blocked his escape route. Jamal was not panicking over logistics. I was terrified of facing decades in a federal prison cell without me. The revelation hung in the air of the upscale steakhouse, thick and suffocating. Jamal was not panicking over logistics. He was terrified of facing decades in a federal prison cell without me. I sat completely motionless, staring at the financial logs on the table. My own brother-in-law had planned to destroy my life to finance his greed. My mother had actively pushed me toward the slaughterhouse. A sharp vibration broke the heavy silence. My smartphone buzzed against the white tablecloth. I looked down, the screen illuminated with a new notification. It was a high-priority email alert forwarded from my personal inbox. The sender was Vice President Donovan. The subject line was written entirely in capital letters demanding my immediate attention. It read, "Urgent mandatory board appearance." I unlocked the screen and opened the message. Harrison leaned forward, his professional curiosity piqued as he watched my eyes scan the text. The email was a masterpiece of corporate intimidation. It abandoned any pretense of professional courtesy. Donovan bypassed standard human resources protocols and went straight for the jugular. He addressed me with cold formality. "Clara," he wrote, "due to the catastrophic nature of your unauthorized departure and the subsequent failure of the operational grid, I am officially mandating your appearance at an emergency executive board meeting tomorrow morning at exactly 8 a.m. You will report directly to the primary glass boardroom. Do not be late." I read the next paragraph aloud, letting Harrison hear the desperation bleeding through Donovan's aggressive corporate speak. "We are facing unprecedented client fallout," I read, keeping my voice steady. "The CEO of Vanguard Logistics, Mr. Maxwell, is currently flying out here on his private jet to personally address this outage. He will be present in the boardroom tomorrow morning. Apex Tech Solutions cannot afford any further delays." I scrolled down to the final paragraph. This was where Donovan laid his cards on the table. This was the ultimatum. "Therefore, we are offering you a one-time resolution to mitigate the damage you have caused. You will arrive tomorrow morning with your laptop. You will restore full operational access to the routing software immediately. Furthermore, you will sign a legally binding transfer of intellectual property rights, relinquishing any claims your private entity holds over the system architecture. You will surrender the code to Apex Tech Solutions entirely. If you comply with these terms, we are willing to handle your abrupt departure and the resulting network disruption internally. If you fail to appear, or if you refuse to sign the transfer documents, we will immediately contact federal authorities. We will press maximum charges for corporate espionage, theft of company property, and intentional sabotage. We have the legal resources to ensure you spend the foreseeable future behind bars. The choice is yours." I finished reading and slid the phone across the table to Harrison. He picked it up, adjusted his reading glasses, and scanned the text himself. Instead of looking concerned, a wide, predatory grin spread across his face. He chuckled softly, shaking his head in sheer disbelief. "This is incredible," Harrison said, tapping the phone screen with his index finger. "Donovan is completely oblivious to the embezzlement. He thinks this is just a disgruntled former employee holding a software license hostage. He has absolutely no idea that his newly appointed senior director is secretly trying to rob his biggest client blind. And to make matters even better, Donovan just put an extortion attempt in writing." I looked at the digital threat. Donovan was trying to force my hand by dangling my freedom in front of me. He genuinely believed I would be terrified of a police investigation. He assumed I would run back to the office, hand over my multi-million-dollar software, and beg for mercy just to avoid a fabricated criminal charge. He thought I was weak. He thought the combined pressure of a furious CEO and a corporate legal team would break me. "He's using Vanguard Logistics as a weapon to intimidate me," I pointed out, leaning back against the leather booth. "Donovan wants me to walk into that room and face the wrath of CEO Maxwell. He wants me to take the blame for the dead network right in front of the client. Then once I sign over the software out of sheer panic, Jamal can use his new security clearance to quietly finalize the transfer of the stolen $1.2 million. They get the software, Jamal gets the money, and I leave with nothing but a ruined reputation." Harrison closed the black folder containing the embezzlement proof and handed it to me. "They have set a trap," he agreed, "but they built it on a foundation of absolute ignorance. They don't realize you have the server logs. They don't realize we know about the offshore account. And they certainly don't realize that their extortion email is the final piece of evidence we need to prove gross managerial negligence on Donovan's part. I placed the folder carefully into my designer tote bag. The documents felt heavy, carrying the power to detonate multiple careers and shatter my toxic family. Tomorrow morning is going to be a bloodbath, I said softly. Harrison signaled the waiter for the check. It will be an execution, he corrected me. We are going to let them set the stage. We are going to let Donovan make his demands. We will let Jamal sit there in his expensive suit believing he has won. And then we are going to drop the hammer. But Clara, you need to be prepared. When we walk into that boardroom tomorrow, there is no turning back. You will be destroying your brother-in-law in front of his employers and his most lucrative client. The fallout will hit your family like a massive tidal wave. Are you completely ready for that specific level of permanent collateral damage? I picked up my purse and smiled. I crossed that line 3 days ago. I left the upscale steakhouse with the thick black folder secured safely in my tote bag. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement. I hailed a cab and headed back to my apartment. The adrenaline from my meeting with Harrison was still thrumming in my veins, sharp and electric. I needed to prepare. I needed to build the execution block. As I unlocked my front door and stepped into the quiet sanctuary of my living room, my smartphone vibrated in my pocket. The screen displayed an incoming call from my father. Richard was calling. I considered ignoring it, but a morbid curiosity compelled me to answer. I swiped the green icon and brought the phone to my ear. I did not say hello. I just waited. Clara, sweetheart. Richard began, his voice dripping with a soft manufactured warmth I had not heard since I was a little girl. It was the exact tone he used when he wanted to convince a difficult client to sign a bad contract. I'm so glad you picked up. Your mother and I have been worried sick about you. We know tensions ran high this morning, but we want to help you fix this before things get out of hand. I walked into my kitchen, set my bag on the counter, and remained completely silent. Listen to me. Richard continued, dropping his pitch to sound like a deeply concerned patriarch. Donovan is furious, but he's a reasonable man. Jamal has been pleading your case to him all afternoon. If you just go into the office tomorrow morning, apologize for your emotional outburst, and give Jamal the administrative passwords, this will all blow over. Jamal is even willing to talk to human resources. He thinks maybe he can let you be his assistant again. You can keep your benefits, Clara. Just do the right thing. Don't ruin your sister's life over a moment of foolish pride. The sheer audacity of his proposal was breathtaking. He wanted me to grovel before a man who was actively trying to send me to federal prison, all so I could serve as his subordinate. Richard was trying to wrap a corporate execution in the warm, fuzzy blanket of family loyalty. You're asking me to hand over my private company so Jamal can pay for a suburban mortgage, I stated flatly. I'm asking you to be a decent sister. Richard snapped, his soft tone cracking for just a fraction of a second before he reined it back in. Clara, please don't force us to watch you destroy your own life. I'm not destroying my life, I replied, my voice devoid of any emotion. I am destroying his. I pulled the phone away from my ear, ignoring my father's sudden sharp intake of breath. I tapped the red button to end the call. Without a second thought, I navigated to his contact profile, scrolled to the very bottom of the screen, and selected block caller. I did the exact same thing for Martha, Olivia, and Jamal. The lines of communication with my toxic family were officially and permanently severed. I would never listen to their manipulative lies again. I turned my attention to the dining table. I retrieved a massive heavy-duty binder I had purchased on my way home. I hooked up my high-speed laser printer and opened my encrypted laptop. The night outside grew dark as I began assembling the guillotine. I printed out exactly 500 pages of pristine, irrefutable evidence. The printer hummed steadily for hours, spitting out stack after stack of paper. I started with the intellectual property certificates, placing the federal copyright registrations into clear plastic sleeves at the very front of the binder. Next came the software licensing agreements, specifically highlighting the termination clauses I had legally exercised. Then I moved on to the dark twist Harrison had uncovered. I printed out the shadow transaction logs showing the microscopic fractions of pennies Jamal had siphoned from Vanguard Logistics over the last 6 months. I printed the digital signature verification tying those specific terminal commands directly to Jamal's corporate credentials. Finally, I printed the destination routing codes clearly displaying the offshore holding account in the Cayman Islands, waiting to receive the embezzled $1.2 million. I organized every single page with color-coded tabs, creating a devastatingly clear narrative of fraud, gross managerial negligence, and intellectual property theft. By the time I snapped the massive metal rings of the binder shut, it was past midnight. The thick black binder weighed nearly 10 heavy pounds. It was a physical manifestation of my vindication. There was only one task left to complete before the sun came up. I opened a secure browser window and bypassed the standard corporate directories. Using a backdoor contact registry I had maintained for server emergencies, I pulled up a highly confidential phone number. It was the direct personal cell phone line for Maxwell, the Chief Executive Officer of Vanguard Logistics. I knew Maxwell was currently in a hotel suite downtown, having flown in on his private jet to deal with the Apex tech crisis. I dialed the number. The phone rang twice before a deep, authoritative voice answered. "This is Maxwell speaking." "Mr. Maxwell," I said, keeping my voice incredibly steady and professional. "My name is Clara. I am the sole owner and developer of the Nexus Freight Dynamics routing architecture, the software that currently manages your entire supply chain." There was a sharp silence on the other end of the line. The CEO was listening. "I am scheduled to attend the emergency board meeting with Donovan at 8:00 tomorrow morning," I continued. "I am calling tonight to personally inform you that the network outage was not a glitch. It was a manual shutdown on my end to prevent a massive internal financial theft targeting your accounts. I have the evidence. I will see you in the boardroom tomorrow." The morning air was crisp as I stepped out of my car and walked toward the towering glass facade of the Apex Tech Solutions building. I carried the 10-pound black binder in my left hand. It felt exactly like a solid, heavy block of absolute justice. I swiped my temporary visitor pass at the front security desk. The guard, a man who had greeted me every single morning for 3 years, looked at me with wide eyes. He had clearly heard the rumors. The entire corporate campus was buzzing with a frantic, nervous energy. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the executive floor. My reflection stared back at me from the polished metal doors. I wore a sharp, tailored charcoal suit and a pair of black stilettos. I did not look like a defeated employee coming to beg for her job. I looked like a corporate executioner. The elevator doors glided open with a soft chime. I walked down the long carpeted hallway leading directly to the primary glass boardroom. I could see them all gathered inside before I even reached the door. The tension in the space was visible, radiating through the transparent walls. I slowly pushed the heavy glass door open and stepped inside the lion's den. The atmosphere in the room hit me instantly. It was thick with hostility and suffocating arrogance. The long mahogany table was surrounded by the most powerful people in the company. Vice President Donovan sat near the head of the table, his face flushed, projecting the aggressive aura of a man who believed he held all the winning cards. Flanking him were three men in identical dark suits, the Apex Tech corporate legal team. They had their legal pads, open, pens poised, ready to draft the terms of my unconditional surrender. Several other executive board members sat along the sides watching me with expressions of sheer contempt. They viewed me as nothing more than a rogue employee who had thrown a tantrum and caused a massive financial headache. They thought they were about to witness my absolute destruction. They thought I was going to cry and plead for mercy. They were preparing to watch Donovan rip my career into tiny shreds. And then there was Jamal. My brother-in-law sat directly across from Donovan. He was practically vibrating with smug satisfaction. Jamal was wearing a brand new, perfectly tailored navy blue suit. The fabric looked incredibly expensive. He must have purchased it over the weekend, prematurely spending the massive salary increase he thought he had secured by stealing my promotion. He leaned back in his plush leather chair with his ankles casually crossed. He held a ceramic coffee cup in one hand and his expensive Mont Blanc pen in the other. He clicked the pen twice. It was the exact same pen he had clicked in my face when he stole my job. When I walked through the door, his eyes locked onto mine. He gave me a slow, victorious smirk. He truly believed he had me completely cornered. Jamal thought my presence in this room meant I had caved to my father's manipulation and Donovan's legal threats. He assumed I was carrying my personal laptop in my bag, ready to plug it in, restore the routing network, and sign away my intellectual property just to stay out of federal prison. I thought he was about to become the hero who saved the Vanguard logistics account, while I would be demoted back to his silent, obedient assistant. The absolute delusion radiating from him was almost impressive. He looked at my black door, assuming it was a printed apology or a desperate list of demands I hoped they would grant. He did not know that his entire life was printed on those 500 pages. He did not know that his offshore account numbers were waiting inside that black cover. Donovan cleared his throat loudly, demanding the room's attention. The murmurs died down instantly. He gestured toward a single empty chair positioned at the very opposite end of the long table. It was the seat traditionally reserved for subordinates facing severe disciplinary action. It was a position of extreme weakness meant to make the person sitting there feel small and surrounded by enemies. "Sit down, Clara," Donovan ordered, his tone flat and uncompromising. "We have a massive operational crisis to resolve, and my patience is entirely depleted. You have caused a phenomenal amount of damage to this organization, and we are going to fix it right now." The corporate lawyers stared at me with predatory eyes. The board members shifted in their seats, crossing their arms and waiting for the execution to begin. Jamal took a slow, arrogant sip of his coffee, waiting for me to pull out the chair and submit to their authority. He gave me a tiny, condescending nod, urging me to obey the man who was threatening my freedom. I did not move toward the empty seat. I did not break eye contact with Donovan. I did not show a single ounce of fear or hesitation. Instead, I walked deliberately toward the head of the table. My stilettos clicked loudly against the floor, a steady, unyielding rhythm that disrupted their perfectly planned intimidation tactic. I stopped right next to the empty space where the CEO of Vanguard Logistics was meant to sit. I placed my heavy black binder onto the polished mahogany wood. The loud, heavy thud echoed through the silent room, causing one of the lawyers to jump slightly in his seat. "I am not going to sit down," I stated, my voice echoing with absolute authority. "And I am not here to negotiate a surrender." I remained standing at the head of the table, looking down at the men who had planned to destroy my life. The vast room grew impossibly quiet as they realized I was not the victim they thought I would be today. Donovan stared at me, his face twisting into raw, unfiltered rage. He had expected a cowering, defeated woman to quietly pull out that empty chair and beg for her corporate life. My absolute refusal to play the submissive role shattered his illusion of control. He slammed his open palms flat against the mahogany wood, pushing himself up so he could lean over the table and try to tower over me. "You listen to me, Clara," Donovan bellowed, his voice vibrating against the glass walls. "You do not get to dictate the terms of this meeting. You do not get to walk in here and play the defiant hero. You are nothing but a disgruntled, highly unprofessional former employee who threw a spectacular emotional tantrum because she lacked the maturity to handle constructive feedback." I kept my expression neutral, letting him exhaust his oxygen. Jamal sat back in his chair, a smug grin plastered across his face. He looked incredibly pleased to have the vice president doing his dirty work. The three lawyers flanked Donovan like obedient attack dogs waiting for me to crack. "You are not just unprofessional," Donovan continued. "You are a thief. You deliberately sabotaged our proprietary systems. You orchestrated a targeted cyber attack on a corporate network because you were jealous of your brother-in-law. You stole company assets, locked us out of our logistics grid, and caused massive financial hemorrhaging. Your stunt has cost Apex Tech Solutions millions of dollars in just 3 days." He was projecting his own failures onto me, twisting the narrative to match the lies he had spun for the board of directors. He needed me to be the unstable villain so he could mask his own spectacular managerial incompetence. He needed me to take the fall for promoting a man who could not even turn the servers back on. I did not interrupt him. I let him dig his own grave with every single word. Donovan reached into his leather portfolio and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. He slapped the stack onto the table and pushed it forcefully across the polished wood. The heavy document slid smoothly, stopping just inches from my hands. He then reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a silver pen, and tossed it onto the papers. It clattered sharply against the silence of the room. This is a non-disclosure and intellectual property transfer agreement. Donovan stated, his tone shifting to cold extortion. It explicitly states that you acknowledge your actions were illegal. It transfers complete ownership of the routing software directly to Apex Tech Solutions. It strips you of any independent rights or future royalties associated with the back-end architecture. Furthermore, it contains an ironclad gag order prohibiting you from discussing the situation with anyone outside this room. I glanced down at the documents. The sheer audacity of his demand was humorous. He was trying to bully me into signing away a multi-million-dollar asset for absolutely nothing in return. Sign it, fix the network, and we won't have you arrested, Donovan demanded. That is the only deal you are getting today. You will plug your laptop into our mainframe right now. You will reboot the routing sequence and restore full administrative access to Jamal. Once the Vanguard Logistics account is stabilized and your signature is on that transfer agreement, we will decline to press federal charges. We will let you walk out with a clean record. If you refuse, I have the police waiting. You will be handcuffed and perp-walked through the lobby. Jamal leaned forward. Just sign the papers, Clara, Jamal urged with fake sympathy. Donovan is being incredibly generous. Don't make this worse for yourself. Think about the family. Think about how devastated your parents will be when they see your mugshot on the evening news. Just give us the software and go home. The lawyers watched me intently, fully expecting me to reach for the silver pen. They assumed the threat of prison would override my common sense. They believed the psychological weight of this ambush would force my total surrender. I looked down at the silver pen. I did not touch it. I did not extend my hand. Instead, I grabbed the massive black binder I had brought. I hoisted it up and dropped it squarely onto the center of the mahogany table, directly on top of Donovan's ridiculous legal contract. The heavy thud of the binder striking the table was incredibly loud. It sounded like a judge's gavel coming down. The sheer weight of my evidence crushed the non-disclosure agreement beneath it. The silver pen bounced off the table and clattered onto the floor. I placed my hands flat on top of the black binder and leaned forward, mirroring Donovan's aggressive posture. I looked directly into his eyes, watching his confident sneer falter for the first time. He stared at the thick binder, a sudden flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. You seem to be operating under a massive delusion, Donovan, I said, my voice soft but carrying clearly across the boardroom. You seem to think you hold the power in this room. You seem to think you have the legal high ground. You seem to think you can threaten me with federal prison for walking away with my private property. Donovan opened his mouth to shout another threat, but I cut him off. I am not going to sign your intellectual property transfer, I stated firmly. I am not going to restore your network access. I am not going to help Jamal fix a crisis he is too incompetent to understand. And I am absolutely not going to sit here and let you call me a thief when the real criminal is sitting right across from you, wearing a suit paid for with stolen money. Jamal's smug smile vanished. The color drained from his face. He gripped his chair tightly. I opened the thick black binder, pulled out crisp, color-coded documents, and walked deliberately around the massive mahogany table. I handed a thick packet to Donovan and slid identical copies directly in front of each corporate lawyer. They stopped glaring at me and started reading. The room was perfectly silent except for the sound of turning pages. Look at page 1. I instructed, my voice calm. That is the federal copyright registration for the foundational architecture of the routing software you are currently trying to hack into. It was filed 3 years ago. Look at page 2. That is the official patent registration under Nexus Freight Dynamics, a private limited liability company where I am listed as the sole proprietor and chief executive officer. Donovan stared at the paper, blinking rapidly as he struggled to comprehend the legal jargon. He looked up at me, his face twisting with confusion and anger. "What is this garbage?" Donovan demanded. "You worked for us. We own everything you do." I shook my head slowly. "Turn to page 5, Donovan," I said. "That is my original employment contract with Apex Tech Solutions. You will notice my role was strictly defined as a data analyst. My contract contained absolutely no provisions for software development, no requirement to code proprietary systems, and zero clauses claiming secondary intellectual property created outside of my designated working hours." I pointed to the highlighted section. "I built that routing system on my personal computer in my own apartment using private resources. I did it because your legacy systems were prehistoric. Because I am a professional, I granted Apex Tech a free revocable end-user license to streamline your operations. You never paid my company a single cent for development. You never offered a buyout. You simply took the results and handed the credit to Jamal." Jamal swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the lawyers, looking for someone to save him. The three men in dark suits were no longer looking at me with predatory confidence. They read the documents with mounting horror. The lead counsel ran his finger down the intellectual property certificates, checking the federal registration numbers. "And since you never paid for it," I continued, "that license remained conditional. When you handed my hard-earned promotion to a man who can't write a basic macro, I exercised my legal right to terminate your access. I did not steal anything. I simply closed my own doors. Your current operational crisis is not my responsibility. It is the direct result of your complete reliance on a system you never owned and a manager who has absolutely zero operational skills." Donovan turned to his lead counsel, his face pale and sweating. "Tell me she's bluffing," Donovan ordered, his voice cracking slightly. "Tell me this is just fake internet paperwork and we can have her arrested right now." The lead attorney did not answer. He flipped back to the first page, scanning the federal seals. He pulled a smartphone from his pocket, opened a legal database app, and typed in the patent registration numbers. The entire boardroom waited in agonizing suspense. The silence stretched out heavy and suffocating. Finally, the lead attorney looked up directly at Donovan. The color had completely drained from the lawyer's face. He leaned in close and whispered, but the room was so quiet that his words carried across the mahogany table. "The documents are flawless," the lawyer whispered, his voice trembling with the realization of their catastrophic mistake. "The patents are real. The copyrights are registered federally. She owns the entire source code outright. We have absolutely no legal claim to the software. None." Donovan looked like he had been struck by lightning. His jaw dropped. The aggressive bullying persona he wore just 5 minutes ago completely evaporated. He stared at me, his eyes wide with newfound terror. "But that's not the worst part," the lead attorney continued, his whisper growing more frantic. "Look at page 12. I instructed them, directing them to the final section." The lawyer flipped to the page and audibly gasped. "By authorizing your information technology department to run brute force attacks against my private servers over the past 72 hours. I explained, you are actively engaging in unauthorized cyber intrusions. You are attempting to hack a private corporate entity. That is a direct violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. You are committing federal crimes right now." All three lawyers immediately pulled out their phones and started furiously texting the IT department to halt all operations. They were in total panic mode. Donovan slumped back in his chair, looking physically ill. "Clara," he stammered, his voice weak and completely broken. "Clara, we can fix this. We can write you a check right now. We will buy the software. Name your price. We will give you the senior director position. We will fire Jamal today. Just turn the network back on before Vanguard Logistics arrives, please." I looked at Donovan, then at Jamal, who was visibly shaking in his expensive suit. The sudden shift in power was absolute. They tried to trap me, and instead they had locked themselves inside a burning building. I did not touch the ridiculous non-disclosure agreement. I did not smile. "I am not here for my job back," I stated, my voice echoing with devastating finality. "I do not want the senior director title. I do not want a quick settlement check. And I am certainly not going to turn your network back on." I placed my hands flat on the table, leaning forward to ensure everyone in the room heard my next words. I am here to formally serve Apex Tech Solutions with a $5 million lawsuit for intellectual property infringement, unauthorized system access, and corporate harassment. The executives gasped. One panicked board member dropped his expensive coffee cup, spilling dark liquid across the polished wood. Donovan buried his face in his hands. I stood incredibly tall, relishing their total destruction. The $5 million demand hung in the air like a physical weight pressing down on the executives. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The lead attorney was still staring at the copyright documents as if hoping the ink would magically disappear. Donovan remained frozen, with his face buried in his trembling hands, the reality of his total corporate failure finally breaking his spirit. But Jamal could not handle the silence. He could not accept that his carefully constructed house of cards had just been obliterated by the woman he had spent years treating like an obedient servant. The terror that had paralyzed him just moments ago suddenly mutated into wild, uncontrollable rage. He pushed his heavy leather chair back so forcefully that it tipped over and crashed loudly against the glass wall behind him. Jamal stood up, his expensive new suit jacket shifting awkwardly over his heaving chest. He slammed his fist down onto the mahogany table, making the scattered legal documents jump. "You are a liar!" Jamal screamed, his voice breaking with sheer desperation. He pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. "You are a complete fraud, Clara. Don't listen to a single word she is saying, Donovan. She is manipulating all of you. She didn't shut down the network because of some intellectual property dispute. That's just a smokescreen." Jamal was panting, his eyes wide and manic as he scanned the room, desperately trying to rally the board members to his side. The executives looked up, confused by his sudden outburst. I stood perfectly still, watching him construct his own trap. I was about to play the one card he thought could save him completely, unaware that I already held the entire deck. "She crashed the routing software to hide her tracks," Jamal yelled, leaning over the table toward me. He turned his frantic gaze to the legal team. "She's a criminal. Over the past 6 months, she has been siphoning money from the Vanguard Logistics account. I found the discrepancies in the billing logs on Friday. That's why I took the promotion. That's why I needed the executive clearance. I was building a case against her. She stole over $1 million from our biggest client. And when she realized I was about to expose her, she locked the entire system down to destroy the evidence. She is trying to extort us for $5 million to cover up her own embezzlement. Don't let her walk out of this building. Call the police right now and have her arrested for grand larceny." The boardroom erupted into chaotic murmurs. Several board members gasped, whispering fiercely to one another. Donovan lifted his head from his hands, a sudden desperate spark of hope igniting in his eyes. He desperately wanted to believe Jamal. He wanted a scapegoat so badly that he was willing to accept this absurd fabricated narrative without a single shred of proof. "You have been stealing from Vanguard," Donovan asked, his voice wavering between anger and relief. "If this is true, Clara, you will never see the light of day." I did not defend myself. I did not shout back or deny his ridiculous claims. I just maintained my cold, steady gaze on Jamal. He was breathing heavily, a triumphant sneer slowly returning to his face. He thought he had outsmarted me. He thought his quick thinking had successfully shifted the target onto my back. He actually believed his lies were going to save him from federal prison. I checked the digital clock on the boardroom wall. It was exactly 8:15 in the morning. Perfect timing. Before Donovan could order the lawyers to contact the authorities, the heavy glass doors of the boardroom swung open with a sharp, commanding swoosh. The sudden movement instantly silenced the entire room. Every head turned towards the entrance. CEO Maxwell of Vanguard Logistics stepped over the threshold. He was a tall, imposing man in his late 50s, wearing a sharp charcoal suit that radiated absolute authority. He did not look panicked about his paralyzed supply chain. He looked like a man arriving to witness an execution. Flanking him on his right side was my attorney Harrison, clutching his own leather briefcase and wearing a deeply satisfied smile. The dynamic in the room shifted so violently, it felt like the air pressure had plummeted. Donovan scrambled to his feet, nearly tripping over his own shoes in his haste to greet the most important client in Apex Tech history. Mr. Maxwell, Donovan stammered, smoothing his tie and forcing a wide, obsequious smile onto his pale face. Thank goodness you're here early. Please come in and sit down. We were just getting to the bottom of this unfortunate network glitch. I assure you we have identified the rogue employee responsible for the disruption, and we are handling it with the utmost severity. Donovan practically lunged forward, extending his right hand to warmly welcome the billionaire executive. He expected a firm handshake and a moment of corporate solidarity. CEO Maxwell did not extend his hand. He did not even break his stride. He walked straight past Donovan, completely ignoring the extended hand, leaving the vice president standing awkwardly in the middle of the room. Maxwell did not look at the board members. He did not look at the legal team. His icy, furious gaze bypassed everyone and locked directly onto Jamal. Jamal stopped smiling immediately. The false confidence melted off his face, replaced by a sudden creeping terror as Maxwell marched toward him with pure disgust. Jamal took a step backward, hitting the glass wall. The room held its breath, waiting for the storm to break. The most powerful man in the logistics industry was staring at a thief who had sealed his own doom. It was time to show him a real corporate execution. Everything aligned exactly as planned. The stage was set, and his absolute destruction was unfolding. CEO Maxwell stood mere inches from Jamal, his presence radiating a quiet, dangerous fury that completely paralyzed the newly appointed executive. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. Nobody dared to breathe. Harrison broke the tension by walking briskly past the frozen legal team and approaching the central multimedia console. He pulled a slim black tablet from his leather briefcase and connected a high-speed cable directly into the primary projector hub. The massive screen at the front of the mahogany table instantly flared to life, casting a bright, harsh light across the faces of the terrified board members. Gentlemen, Harrison began, his voice commanding the absolute attention of every single person in the room. My client Clara did not hack your systems. She did not sabotage your network to cover up a financial crime. She is not a disgruntled employee throwing a tantrum. In reality, my client is the only reason you are not all currently facing federal indictment for gross corporate negligence. Harrison tapped the screen of his tablet. A complex, highly detailed spreadsheet appeared on the projector. It was the exact same file I had shown him yesterday at the steakhouse, but now it was magnified for the entire executive board to scrutinize. The document clearly displayed the massive billing grid for Vanguard Logistics. Mr. Maxwell brought us in to conduct a quiet, independent forensic audit of his company's shipping invoices, Harrison explained smoothly, weaving the narrative we had carefully constructed to protect my intellectual property while exposing the true criminal. During that audit, we discovered a highly sophisticated, deeply buried algorithm siphoning microscopic fractions of pennies from every single Vanguard freight transaction over the past 6 months. Donovan turned completely pale. He looked at the screen, then at me, and finally at Jamal, who was currently trembling violently against the glass wall. The Apex Tech lawyers scrambled to open their own laptops, desperately trying to log into their internal auditing software to verify Harrison's shocking claims. Harrison tapped the tablet again. The screen shifted to a new document. This one showed a digital holding vault containing exactly $1.2 million. Next to the vault was a scheduled wire transfer protocol. The destination was an untraceable offshore banking account located in the Cayman Islands. The thief successfully accumulated over $1 million. Harrison continued, his tone sharp and relentless. But they ran into a significant logistical problem. They could not authorize the final offshore transfer without a Level 5 executive security clearance. They needed a massive promotion to finalize the theft. Harrison swiped to the final slide. It was a digital access log, time-stamped from late Friday night. It displayed a successful login attempt to the financial routing mainframe. Right next to the timestamp was a glaring, undeniable digital signature. It was a unique alphanumeric code tied directly to a specific corporate identity. This is the access log showing the exact moment the final transfer sequence was initiated, Harrison announced, pointing his pen at the projector screen. As you can clearly see, The digital signature belongs to the newly promoted Senior Director of Operations, Jamal. The entire boardroom erupted into chaotic gasps. Donovan stumbled backward, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He looked at Jamal with a mixture of profound shock and absolute horror. The vice president realized he had personally handed the keys of the corporate treasury to an active embezzler. He had championed a thief while attempting to send the actual software developer to federal prison. Jamal opened his mouth to deny it, but no words came out. His chest heaved as he frantically searched the room for a friendly face. He found none. Maxwell glared at him with pure disgust, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. The Apex Tech legal team immediately shoved their chairs away from the table, physically distancing themselves from the exposed criminal to avoid any implication of complicity. As the reality of the situation crashed down upon the executives, a sudden movement outside the glass walls caught my attention. The elevators in the main lobby chimed loudly. The doors slid open in perfect unison. 6 individuals stepped out onto the executive floor. They did not look like corporate clients or standard office visitors. They wore sharp windbreakers and carried thick utility belts. They moved with coordinated tactical precision. They walked directly toward the glass boardroom. The man leading the group held up a badge, pressing the gold shield flat against the transparent wall for everyone inside to see. White-collar crime detectives. They had arrived exactly on schedule, summoned by the evidence Harrison had quietly forwarded to the federal authorities late last night. The sight of the badges shattered the final remnants of Jamal's arrogant facade. The reality of his impending incarceration hit him with devastating force. He realized his perfect plan had failed entirely. He was not getting the money. He was not keeping the promotion. He was not going back to his comfortable suburban life. Jamal's knees buckled. He collapsed onto the carpeted floor, his expensive new tailored suit bunching awkwardly around his shaking shoulders. The man who had strutted into this room acting like a king was instantly reduced to a weeping, pathetic mess. He covered his face with his hands, sobbing loudly as the harsh truth of his future settled over him. He looked up from the floor, tears streaming down his cheeks, his eyes bloodshot and wide with absolute terror. He crawled forward on his hands and knees, scrambling toward the spot where I stood at the head of the mahogany table. "Please, Clara," Jamal begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, hysterical whine. "Please, you have to tell them to stop. You have to help me. I'm family. Please, Clara, think of Olivia. She's pregnant. She's having a baby. You can't let them take me away." I looked down at him, ice in my veins. "You don't need leadership vision where you're going, Jamal." The heavy glass doors swung wide open before my final word could even settle into the tense air of the boardroom. The lead detective stepped over the threshold with absolute authority, his gold shield catching the fluorescent light. 2 uniformed officers followed closely behind him, their expressions completely devoid of sympathy. They bypassed the stunned legal team, walked straight past a trembling Donovan, and stopped directly behind Jamal. "Get up," the lead detective ordered, his voice echoing loudly in the enclosed space. Jamal was still on his knees, his face buried in his hands, weeping uncontrollably onto the expensive carpet. He did not move. He was entirely paralyzed by the sudden, brutal collision of his actions and their consequences. One of the uniformed officers reached down, grabbed the lapels of Jamal's brand-new tailored suit jacket, and hauled him forcefully to his feet. Jamal stumbled, his legs barely able to support his own weight. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," the officer instructed, spinning Jamal around. The sound that followed was sharp and metallic. The heavy steel handcuffs clicked securely around Jamal's wrists, locking his arms tightly behind him. The crisp, mechanical noise seemed to break a spell in the room. The Apex Tech lawyers collectively gasped. Donovan pressed himself firmly into his leather chair, desperately trying to distance himself from the criminal he had personally championed just days prior. "Please," Jamal begged, twisting his neck to look at the board members. "I can explain the discrepancies. I can fix the routing logs. It was just a temporary hold on the accounts." "You have the right to remain silent," the detective stated loudly, cutting off Jamal's pathetic attempts to justify his embezzlement. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As the detective finished reading him his Miranda rights, the officers turned Jamal toward the exit. This was the moment I had anticipated with profound clarity. The officers marched Jamal out of the glass boardroom and directly into the main bullpen of the operational floor. The entire company had stopped working. Hundreds of employees had abandoned their cubicles and lined the main aisle. These were the exact same people who had stood in stunned silence 3 days ago, when Donovan publicly threatened to destroy my career. They had watched me carry a cardboard box to the elevator. Now they were watching the newly appointed Senior Director of Operations being paraded through the office in handcuffs. Jamal tried to lower his chin to hide his tear-stained face, but the officers kept him moving at a brisk, unrelenting pace. Whispers erupted across the floor like a wildfire. Cell phones were discreetly raised to capture the historic downfall of the most arrogant man in the building. His public execution was flawless, televised to his peers, his subordinates, and his rivals. The man who had stolen my achievements to secure a suburban mortgage was now heading to a concrete holding cell. I watched him disappear into the elevator bank, feeling the heavy burden of my family's toxic expectations vanish completely with him. Back inside the boardroom, the real corporate carnage was just beginning. CEO Maxwell of Vanguard Logistics turned his back on the glass wall and looked directly at the remaining executives. His face was a mask of pure, concentrated fury. He did not raise his voice, but his low, rumbling tone commanded absolute terror. For 3 years, my company has entrusted Apex Tech Solutions with millions of dollars in daily freight logistics, Maxwell stated, glaring at the panicked board members. We trusted your infrastructure. We trusted your executive oversight. Today I walk into this room to discover that your systems are completely paralyzed, your intellectual property is owned by a private third party, and your senior director was actively siphoning over $1 million from my holding accounts to fund an offshore vault. Donovan opened his mouth, stammering frantically as he tried to offer an excuse. Mr. Maxwell, I assure you we had absolutely no knowledge of his illicit activities. We were misled by his performance reports. You were misled because you are grossly incompetent, Maxwell interrupted, shutting Donovan down instantly. You promoted a thief to manage your largest client because you failed to conduct a basic forensic audit of your own internal architecture. You allowed personal bias and blind arrogance to override basic security protocols. I am officially terminating our operational contract with Apex Tech Solutions, effective immediately. Our legal team will be in contact to discuss the massive financial damages your negligence has caused my organization. Maxwell did not wait for a response. He adjusted his suit jacket, gave me a single respectful nod, acknowledging my role in stopping the theft, and walked out of the boardroom. His departure sucked the remaining oxygen out of the room. The loss of the Vanguard contract meant the immediate, irreversible bankruptcy of Apex Tech. The company was financially dead. The chairman of the executive board stood up from his seat at the side of the mahogany table. His face was purple with rage. He turned his furious gaze entirely upon Donovan. You personally bypassed human resources to push that criminal through the executive pipeline, the chairman yelled, slamming his hand on the table. You ignored the warnings about the software licensing. You drove our most valuable asset out of the building to protect your own ego. You have single-handedly destroyed this entire corporation. Donovan shrank back into his chair, raising his hands in a weak defensive posture. We can restructure, Donovan pleaded, his voice trembling. I can call other investors. I can salvage the quarter. You are going to pack your desk right now, the chairman roared, signaling to a pair of corporate security guards standing near the entrance. You are fired, Donovan. You are terminated immediately for gross managerial negligence, extreme nepotism, and creating catastrophic corporate liability. The security team will escort you off the premises. You will never set foot in this building again. Donovan looked completely shattered. The bully who had threatened to blacklist me across the industry was now officially ruined. He was disgraced, fired, and facing immense civil liability. The guard stepped forward, hauling Donovan out of his chair and marching him toward his corner office to supervise his unceremonious exit. With the immediate threats neutralized, Harrison stepped to the center of the table. He looked at the pale, sweating corporate lawyers who remained seated. "Gentlemen," Harrison said smoothly, adjusting his tie. "As my client previously stated, we are formally pursuing a $5 million lawsuit for intellectual property infringement and unauthorized network intrusion. Given the events that just transpired in this room, I highly suggest you advise your remaining board members to settle this matter quickly. Prolonging this in federal court will only generate more devastating press for whatever remains of your company." Harrison placed a single crisp business card onto the table. "You have 24 hours to contact my office to finalize the settlement negotiations. If we do not hear from you, we will file the injunction publicly." I reached out and picked up my heavy black binder. I did not need to say another word. My evidence had spoken louder than any argument ever could. I looked around the wrecked boardroom one last time, absorbing the total victory. I turned my back on the terrified executives, walked through the heavy glass doors, and strode down the carpeted hallway. My heels clicked with a steady, victorious rhythm. I stepped into the elevator, pressed the lobby button, and watched the doors close on the ashes of their corporate empire. The $5 million settlement was already guaranteed, and my future was completely my own. The news of Jamal's arrest did not take long to reach my family. By noon, the local business journals had already picked up the story of a massive executive shakeup and an embezzlement scandal at Apex Tech Solutions. But the real devastation happened behind the closed doors of my parents' immaculate home. I did not have to be there to know exactly how it played out, because the frantic voicemails that flooded my blocked messages folder painted a perfectly detailed picture of their total destruction. Olivia was the first to realize the true extent of the nightmare. She had received a phone call from Jamal's frantic defense attorney demanding a massive retainer fee to keep her husband out of federal prison. When Olivia logged into their joint banking portal to transfer the funds, she was met with a series of absolute zero balances. Jamal had not just attempted to steal $1.2 million from Vanguard Logistics. He had already completely drained their personal savings, their checking accounts, and the college fund they had started for their unborn child. He had taken every single cent to pay off shady creditors and aggressive loan sharks who had been funding his lavish fake executive lifestyle for the past year. The custom-tailored suits, the expensive dinners, the country club memberships, Jamal had financed his arrogant persona entirely on borrowed money and stolen funds. When the harsh reality of her husband's absolute betrayal crashed down on her, Olivia did what she always did. She completely panicked and ran crying to our parents for a rapid financial rescue. But there would be no rescue this time. Martha and Richard were sitting in their pristine living room when a pair of federal investigators knocked loudly on their front door. The authorities were tracing the complicated web of Jamal's fraudulent financial activities, and that dangerous web led directly to my parents' doorstep. The serious agents carried thick manila folders containing the mortgage documents for Olivia's massive new suburban dream house, the beautiful 5-bedroom home my mother had constantly weaponized against me, the house I was supposed to sacrifice my career to subsidize. When the investigators laid the paperwork out on the coffee table, the ultimate karma finally arrived to collect its due. My parents had secretly co-signed Jamal's massive mortgage loans. Richard had proudly attached his own pristine credit history and his entire retirement portfolio to secure the property for his golden child. But Jamal had not used legitimate income to qualify for those enormous loans. He had submitted falsified earnings reports and fraudulent tax documents inflating his wealth to secure a house they could never actually afford. By attaching their names to those heavily doctored financial statements, my parents had inadvertently made themselves legally liable for millions of dollars in fraudulent debt. The federal investigators informed Richard that the bank was immediately calling the loans due. The suburban dream house was going to be seized, but the fallout did not stop there. Because they had co-signed on loans secured by federal fraud, the bank had successfully petitioned to freeze my parents' personal assets. Their retirement accounts, their investment portfolios, and the massive equity in their own home were completely locked down pending a federal financial investigation. They had literally wagered their entire life savings on Jamal's unearned success, and they had lost absolutely everything in the span of a single morning. The magnificent illusion of the perfect family had been entirely shattered. Olivia was no longer the successful, pampered suburban wife preparing for a beautiful baby. She was the terrified spouse of a convicted felon facing imminent eviction and total bankruptcy. Her perfect provider husband was currently sitting in a cold concrete cell, exposed as a desperate, incompetent thief who had ruined her life to feed his own massive ego. Martha could no longer host her elegant country club dinners and brag about her brilliant son-in-law. Her social standing was instantly obliterated. Her friends and neighbors were currently reading about the embezzlement scandal online, whispering about how the arrogant family had finally fallen from grace. Richard was no longer the stern, commanding patriarch who could bully his daughters into submission. He was a ruined man staring down the barrel of a federal financial probe that would strip him of every single dollar he had spent decades accumulating. The golden child and the perfect provider had burned the family legacy to the ground. For 33 years, they had treated me like a worthless outsider. They had called me selfish, dramatic, and ungrateful. They had demanded I sacrifice my dignity, my hard work, and my future to pave a comfortable road for people who completely despised me. They had blindly trusted a charismatic liar simply because he told them exactly what they wanted to hear while they continuously punished the daughter who actually kept the lights on. Now the heavy consequences of their own toxic choices had finally arrived. I sat in my quiet, peaceful apartment, listening to the desperate blocked voicemails piling up on my phone. They were begging me for money. They were begging me to drop the intellectual property lawsuit so Apex Tech might lessen Jamal's charges. They were pleading for the very same daughter they had tried to destroy just 24 hours ago. I did not feel a single drop of sympathy. I felt only the clean, sharp edge of absolute justice. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, walked over to my window, and watched the city move below. The bustling traffic and towering skyscrapers looked completely different today. For the very first time in my entire adult life, I was no longer carrying the crushing weight of their expectations. I was entirely free from their manipulative demands and endless greed. I took a slow sip of the hot coffee, enjoying the absolute unbroken silence of my beautiful home. The war was finally over, and I had won. My future was finally mine. 2 weeks later, my freedom took the form of an office suite on the 42nd floor of a downtown high-rise. CEO Maxwell had approached me the very next morning with an unprecedented offer. Vanguard Logistics provided the massive seed funding required to transition Nexus Freight Dynamics from a legal shield into a fully operational tech enterprise. I was no longer a hidden developer. I was the chief executive officer of my own highly capitalized company. I spent my days hiring top-tier engineering talent, designing advanced logistical frameworks, and looking out through windows that offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. I had completely isolated myself from the toxic wreckage of my past. Or so I thought. My private desk phone chimed softly. My executive assistant spoke through the intercom, her voice tight with distinct alarm. Clara, there are 3 individuals in the main reception area, causing a significant disturbance. They bypassed the lobby security desk by following a catering delivery crew onto the elevator. They are aggressively demanding to see you. They claim they are your parents and your sister. I leaned back in my chair. I did not feel panic. I felt cold curiosity. Send them back to my office, I instructed, and please have the building security team standing by in the hallway. Less than a minute later, the frosted glass doors of my suite were shoved open. Richard, Martha, and Olivia stumbled into the pristine space. The contrast between my sleek corporate environment and their absolute desperation was jarring. They looked ravaged by the consequences of their actions. Richard wore a rumpled jacket, his usual commanding posture collapsed into a defeated slump. Martha had entirely abandoned her perfectly manicured country club aesthetic. Her hair was frizzy and her face was lined with sheer exhaustion. Olivia trailed behind them, her face red and blotchy from crying, clutching her maternity blouse with shaking hands. They stopped in the center of the large room, their eyes darting nervously around the luxurious office, before finally landing on me. I remained seated behind my expansive desk. I did not stand to greet them. I did not offer them a chair. I simply waited in absolute silence, forcing them to initiate the conversation they had so desperately forced upon me. "Clara, please." Richard started, his voice cracking. He held his hands up. "We know we have no right to be here. We know you blocked our numbers, but we simply had nowhere else to turn. The banks have frozen absolutely everything. The foreclosure process on our home has started. We can't even afford to hire a decent defense attorney for Jamal. They're transferring him to a federal holding facility tomorrow morning." Olivia let out a loud, pathetic wail. She rushed forward, slamming her hands flat against my desk. "You have to save him, Clara," she sobbed hysterically. "You have to drop the intellectual property lawsuit against Apex Tech. Their corporate lawyers contacted us. They said if you withdraw the $5 million penalty, the company might have enough capital to survive. They said if the company survives, they might drop the severe corporate espionage charges against Jamal. You can keep him out of federal prison. You have to do it for your niece. You can't let my baby grow up with a father behind bars." I looked at my sister, feeling absolutely nothing but mild disgust. She was still trying to weaponize her pregnancy to force my compliance. She was still expecting me to sacrifice my massive financial victory to save a man who had actively planned to destroy my entire life. Martha pushed past Olivia, her hands clasped together as if praying. "Clara, we are begging you," Martha cried, her voice high and desperate. "Drop the lawsuit. We know Vanguard funded this new company. We know you have millions of dollars now. We just need enough cash to satisfy the bank and unfreeze our retirement accounts. We will lose the house. We will be out on the street. We are your family. You can't just sit up here in this ivory tower and watch us lose everything." I let their frantic, pathetic begging fill the room. I let them exhaust their tearful demands. I looked at the three people who had spent my entire existence making me feel small, worthless, and disposable. They had gladly thrown me to the wolves to protect a criminal. Now that the wolves had devoured them instead, they expected me to play the loyal, obedient daughter one last time. I stood up and walked around the massive desk until I was directly in front of them. They looked up with wide, desperate eyes, waiting for me to write the check that would erase their toxic mistakes. "I am not dropping the lawsuit," I stated, my voice echoing with chilling finality. "I am not giving you $1, and I am not lifting a finger to save Jamal from a federal prison cell. He dug his grave and you handed him the shovel." Richard gasped, his face turning white. "Clara, you can't mean that. We're family." I looked directly into my father's eyes. "Family isn't a title you invoke only when you need a human shield or a checkbook," I said. "You made your choice in that boardroom. Live with it." I pressed a button on my smartwatch. The glass doors swung open. 4 security guards stepped inside. "Escort these individuals out of the building," I commanded. "If they return, have them arrested for trespassing." My parents did not fight. The shock of my boundary had broken them. Richard's shoulders sagged as a guard grasped his arm. Martha wept uncontrollably into her hands. Olivia shrieked insults as the security team physically guided her out. I did not even watch them leave. I picked up my silver pen, turned back to my computer monitor, and simply got right back to work. 1 year later, the harsh memory of that afternoon in my office feels like a scene from someone else's lifetime. I stand by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown penthouse apartment, holding a mug of dark roast coffee, and watch the morning sun reflect off the soaring glass skyscrapers. The city below is a grid of endless movement and pure potential, completely devoid of the suffocating weight I carried for 33 years. My company, Nexus Freight Dynamics, is no longer just a private legal entity hiding in the shadows. With the massive influx of capital from Vanguard Logistics and the seamless integration of our routing architecture across the global supply chain, my startup evolved into an unstoppable industry titan. We recently moved our expanding team of 50 engineers into a state-of-the-art headquarters spanning 3 full floors in the financial district. The $5 million intellectual property settlement we extracted from the crumbling ruins of Apex Tech Solutions served as our initial expansion fund. Donovan and his corporate cronies paid heavily for their arrogant assumptions. Apex Tech filed for total bankruptcy exactly 6 months ago. Their remaining corporate assets were liquidated to satisfy a mountain of creditor demands and federal fines. Jamal was formally convicted of wire fraud and corporate embezzlement after a very brief, highly publicized federal trial. He is currently serving a 72-month sentence in a maximum security correctional facility, stripped of his tailored suits and his fabricated prestige. Olivia was forced to sell the luxury suburban house at a massive loss before the bank could fully foreclose on the property. She moved into a cramped two-bedroom apartment, raising her baby, without the golden pedestal she always demanded. My parents, Richard and Martha, had their retirement portfolios completely decimated by their choice to co-sign Jamal's fraudulent loans. They live in a small rented duplex on the outskirts of the city, their country club memberships and immaculate social standing entirely erased by their own toxic greed. I know these specific details because my attorney Harrison keeps me briefly updated on any legal ripples tied to the Apex settlement. I do not look them up online. I do not drive past their new neighborhood to gloat. I do not check my filtered emails for desperate apologies or manipulative guilt trips. The absolute silence they left behind is the most beautiful sound I have ever experienced. People often romanticize the concept of family in our society. We are taught from a very young age that sharing blood requires endless forgiveness, infinite patience, and the continuous sacrifice of our own personal boundaries. We are conditioned to believe that walking away from our parents or our siblings is the ultimate moral failure. The story of Clara serves as a powerful masterclass in recognizing one's own undeniable worth and the profound necessity of establishing absolute boundaries. For far too long, society has peddled the dangerous narrative that family loyalty must be unconditional, even when it comes at the steep cost of our own dignity, mental health, and professional success. Clara's journey shatters this toxic myth entirely, revealing a difficult but necessary truth. Sharing DNA with someone does not grant them a permanent consequence-free pass to exploit your brilliance or demand your subjugation. The core lesson here is that walking away is never an act of surrender. Rather, it is the ultimate act of self-preservation. When Clara's family demanded she sacrifice her career to subsidize her brother-in-law's unearned arrogance, they heavily relied on decades of ingrained guilt. They assumed her compliance was simply a given. However, Clara demonstrated that true empowerment begins the exact moment you consciously stop setting yourself on fire just to keep toxic people warm. By calmly reclaiming her intellectual property and walking out of that boardroom, she dismantled their control and reclaimed her future. Often we endure abusive dynamics because we fear the unknown or dread the heavy guilt of cutting ties. We falsely believe that enduring mistreatment makes us noble or righteous. Yet Clara's ultimate triumph was not merely financial. It was the profound peace she found in her penthouse, completely free from manipulation. She proved that when an environment requires you to shrink yourself to make others comfortable, you must leave that room entirely and build your own. Your talents, your peace of mind, and your bright future belong solely to you. Take a moment today to evaluate the relationships in your life and boldly sever ties with anyone who consistently drains your energy and diminishes your worth.